Welcome to Job Tales, the podcast where we explore careers around the world and the people behind them. I'm your host, Laura Leoncini, and each week I bring you stories from professionals around the world to inspire and guide you in finding your own path. Today's episode is all about ADHD coaching. I'm thrilled to have Carolina della Torre Ugarte as our guest, an ADHD coach who helps individuals harness their strength and overcome challenges in both personal and professional life. Let's dive into this fascinating and impactful profession. Carolina, welcome to the show, Job Tales. You have a very interesting job. It's ADHD coach. Now, before we start, can you tell me what is ADHD?
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for the question. It's definitely one that I get asked a lot.
Yes, I imagine.
Yeah, it's something that keeps coming up more and more, especially since after COVID. But the acronym itself stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder. And so if you look in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, published by the American Psychiatric Association, APA in the US, it is kind of the main guideline about how to understand different types of mental health disorders and different types of challenges and conditions. So with ADHD, the main thing that comes here is that there is first of all, a component that it's neurodevelopmental, which means that we developed in utero, and I say we because I also have ADHD.
Okay.
So in utero, our brains developed in a certain way where, this is a bit of a simplification, but essentially what happens is most of the tasks are executive functions, as they're called. Most of the tasks that require us to plan, organize, weigh pros and cons, make decisions, those things require dopamine in the brain and other types of neurotransmitters. So essentially what happens is that one synapse in the brain is trying to communicate to another synapse to help us get off the couch and do something, or to start doing the dishes, or to answer that email. And what essentially happens is the threshold of dopamine for someone with ADHD is much higher to actually get the message across. So even if someone has the willpower to want to do something, if there's not enough of the neurotransmitters getting from one synapse to the other, it will be very difficult to find the physical motivation, let's say, to get up and do the thing. So this is a part of the attention part of the ADHD. So we talk about it as attention in thinking that it's difficult to hold focus on something. And so, but the key thing I focus on is about the difficulties with getting something started. Because once you're into a task, you have full attention into something and it works pretty well. But the hard part is getting that first attention going. And then the hyperactivity part is much more, for example, we think of the 13-year-old boy sitting in the classroom that can't sit still. Yes, that can be one manifestation of ADHD. Could also be a lot of other things. But what people don't often think about in terms of hyperactivity is mental hyperactivity. A lot of people have been seeing more and more on TikTok, social media, about having like multiple conversations going on in the brain at the same time, plus 2 or 3 songs happening at the same time. And that is kind of how the hyperactive part works in the brain. And it can be quite difficult to kind of channel and focus all of those things happening at the same time. So sometimes it's an overstimulation of too many things coming in at once. And so that can be the hyperactivity, or it can be not enough dopamine, not enough stimulus to hold your attention. And that's where the attention kind of comes in.
So either too little or too much.
Yeah.
Basically. And is it something new because it was studied recently and we know about it recently? Or is it, in the 1800s, did people suffer from ADHD?
That's a really good question. So essentially, how we kind of look at ADHD is that actually since the 1800s, I believe that is when the first mention of some kind of hyperactivity challenge was mentioned within like psychiatric discussions. I don't remember the name of the lovely gentleman, but he had written some kind of description of an observation of a child that was displayed some kind of a persistent trend, some persistent behavior that was just constant and was, let's say, outside of the typical that he would see. And so this was kind of the first time mentioned in, I think, like the late 1800s. But essentially, ADHD is similar to a lot of other disabilities in the sense that the way the disability community talks about accessibility and disabilities is that if every building had a wheelchair ramp, if every building was made for someone with a wheelchair as the standard, it would not be a disability anymore. So when we think about ADHD as a disorder, it's another way of thinking. It's another way of the brain organizing or disorganizing
Right.
information, but there are a lot of pros and cons to it. So if, our brains function differently, it's not necessarily anything new. It's just that our society kind of is built in a certain way that it likes structure, it likes predictability, it likes 9 to 5, it likes boxes. And sometimes for ADHD, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a bit of spontaneity. We're looking for some sense of routine and structure, but also looking for the novelty, looking for to go through our passions, being enthusiastic about things. So I think ADHD has existed for a long time. And there are also some researchers that say hunter-gatherers may have well been people who had neurodivergent brains as well. But of course, we don't know everything. And this is very much a social construct, something that we as humans have, observed, looked at, and decided to conceptualize in a certain way. So who knows what will happen in the next 20 years, how we'll conceptualize it. But yeah, ADHD has been around for a long time.
So, how do you help ADHD individual?
Yeah, so the main way that I help people with ADHD is to, first of all, listen. Listen. And the first thing with that is being able to listen to all of the challenges and struggles that they've had, things that they think are unique to them. I mean, everyone has a unique experience, but I just can't focus, or I'm having a hard time getting my project started. So I listen to that and I'm able to talk about psychoeducation. Psychoeducation is a therapeutic tool that can be done not just by therapists, but it's essentially an explanation of how the brain works and how ADHD works and how that can help us understand a little more the why we do certain things. Because for some of us, it's very helpful to understand the why. We're curious people. So what I can do is first explain a bit, hey, first of all, you're not alone. This is something that is quite common for people with ADHD and other types of neurodivergences. So this is the first side, to talk about how some of this is not in your control.
Right.
And then we get to focus on the fun part, which is what is in your control? How do we put mechanisms in place, structure in place in your life to be able to do the things you want to do? Not what you should do in guillemets, but what you want to do out of life. Wanting to do a project, wanting to, stay fit, to hold your grandchildren, or to get a dog. But it's a lot of it. The way I kind of talk about it is ADHD coaching is like taking project management tools and applying it to your daily life.
Okay.
That kind of helps a lot.
So then you become, you teach them to have a self-discipline so that they can.
Exactly. A bit of a self-discipline and also some self-compassion, because you won't be consistent 100% of the time. And that's okay. We have way too high standards for ourselves.
That is true. And society also has high standards.
Exactly. And so I also talk about how, like, a lot of the tools that we talk about using for ADHD, if anyone out there hears that that's helpful, it doesn't necessarily mean you have ADHD.
Right.
ADHD
Because
is
I do feel kind of.
yeah, like
It does
everyone
speak to
can
me.
relate.
Exactly.
Yeah, at one point or other, there's always something that's relatable with ADHD. And it's true, because we all forget things, we all procrastinate, we all struggle. However, with ADHD, it's the frequency of it all. It just happens constantly, and there's just no managing it until you get the support you need. So that's kind of where coaching can be one aspect of support.
Fascinating. So I imagine that because you have ADHD, is it difficult then to kind of take yourself as an observer and not be affected by your own, say, disorder when you listen to others?
Oh, yes. No, that's a very good one. So one of the types of disciplines that I've also studied, because I'm very multidisciplinary, is anthropology. And with anthropology, something that's really great about it is one of the key points of anthropology is to kind of question everything. How did something come to be the way it is? And so even if you talk to, 100 people that get diagnosed with ADHD, each of their stories are going to be hugely different. And then from my sociology side, I bring in a term, what's called the concept of intersectionality, meaning that even intersectionality is where you take the different parts of identities and cultures and pieces of someone's life, and you're able to see the nuance between each of them. So, for example, I am a white presenting woman with ADHD who is also Latina, who also immigrated to Switzerland. So, my ADHD is going to be very different from a Swiss woman born here whose parents are from Morocco, etc., etc.
Uh-huh.
So, although there are certain commonalities, I'm very aware of the fact that my story is not going to be the same as yours. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime I do share my experiences with others, like when I first tried medication or what brought me in to even think about getting myself evaluated for ADHD, I always give the disclaimer of, hey, this was my experience, but it's not everyone's. And if
Mm.
I can think of an experience of others that I know, I'll use that as a second example, just to show the variety so that people don't think my story is the model, because there is no model.
Yeah. Okay. And you talked about anthropology, so let's look at your studies. How did your path lead you to becoming an ADHD coach?
Yeah, so it allows me to bring in also this aspect of my other side of my life, which is I'm an expert on prisons. So,
Prisons.
yeah, so
Fantastic.
originally, my plan in bachelor's was to become a prison psychologist. I wanted to help people in prison, and it was like a dream to be able to visit with people and try to support them. Just because I felt like there's a whole story to it, but I mean, essentially, people in prison get excluded; they become the exception, and so I wanted to be a part of being a space for them to come into society,
Hmm.
which often they're marginalized even before going into prison. But anyway,
Hmm.
I digress. So I studied psychology and sociology as my background, wanting to become a prison psychologist. And when I completed my studies, I thought, oh, I really like mental health. And I see there are a lot of systemic issues of like we could change certain things about the system, about laws. So I would like to go a little more into sociology again. So then we moved to Geneva, me and my husband, and I started studying after a little while. I studied sociology and anthropology. And I was looking more at, okay, how can we, make prisons more humane? How can we improve conditions? And then also further and further into my studies, I also realized, oh, well, what about alternatives to prison? What can we do differently altogether? So that kind of dovetailed a lot in terms of my actual trajectory to becoming an ADHD coach, because I had become an expert, a very niche expert in things about prisons. Like I can talk about prison health, inequalities, statistics, law, policy, but there aren't so many jobs out there that deal with this kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I imagine.
And a lot of the opportunities I did see were in volunteer work. And I am a volunteer myself. I do visit people in prison and I love it, but I also have bills to pay. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, how do I blend the two? So then when I got my diagnosis with ADHD, I had already had some experience working as like an organizational psychologist, assessing mental health in workplaces for a small NGO. And so I thought, okay, what if I can work on becoming a coach for people with ADHD to kind of get started, to move into this arena? And then I can, once I have some stability and all of this, then I can start working with people coming out of prison. And I can be what's called a reentry coach, to be able to be a space for them that is non judgmental, to help give them structure, to help them explore options like entrepreneurial options. This is not
Yeah.
something that's not always seen as an easy task, but among the people I've talked with in prison, oh my gosh, there are so many people that are so smart, they're so creative, they find solutions. If you just give them the space, they will find their way. So yeah, so this was kind of how I came to ADHD coaching.
Okay.
Also, because in Geneva, the health professionals are really excited about well, not excited about, but they're working a lot with people in prison on issues of ADHD. And I found that really interesting. So I was like,
Mm.
okay, there's already some interest, some funding, some research on this. So I see a kind of path forward to be able to kind of support people in prison, and also to be able to support people like myself that got diagnosed, especially as an adult. It's something new. You have to relearn things, and you have to relearn about yourself. So after I went through that experience, and as I continue on my journey, it's nice to support others as well, and to share all this information in my head that yeah, I think a lot of people can benefit from.
Yeah, to be helpful. Yeah, for sure. And it seems that yeah, you really definitely chose a job that can be helpful for others. That's your calling. So it seems. Yeah, and it's fantastic. And so, how did you find your first customers? Being a coach, I imagine you're independent. How did you get out there into the market?
Yeah, so the first one that I had, it was quite funny. I was just chatting with some people at a conference, and we exchanged information with a young woman, and she wrote to me and said, "Hey, I really liked what you talk about the coaching. Like, I would love to learn more." And I was like, "Yeah, cool." I thought she was going to ask me how to become a coach. So it wasn't even my radar of like, oh yeah, she's a client. So we were talking, having coffee, the next day, and she was like, "So tell me how it works." And then I realized she wanted to be a client, and I was like, "Oh,
Ah,
fantastic."
that's awesome.
So it was nice. So that
Okay.
was the first person that I found. But also something that has been extremely helpful is through the training that I'm doing, that I'm receiving. I'm also connected with an association based out of Lausanne called Aspeda. And they are a big support for the Swiss Romande in terms of parents with children of ADHD, but also anyone that has ADHD. It's just kind of how it got started by parents.
Hmm.
And so they also take requests for people that are looking for coaches. So I also get referrals through them.
Nice, nice. Yeah, awesome. And so, what are you most proud of today?
Ooh, I
That's a
think what
big
I'm most
question.
proud of, yeah, what I'm most proud of today is that if I look at my track record of how many times I've tried to start a project, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a book, whether it's a thesis, whatever it is, too many times I start it, it's all organized, it's beautiful, it's got a plan, and it doesn't go anywhere. And it gets put on a shelf of projects that I'll come back to it later. But this, in terms of the coaching, has been something that I've been able to keep up with, and I'm not losing steam on. And, I take the time to do other things in the meantime to keep my brain excited, keep it guessing. But I've been able to stick with it. So even though I have all these cognitive distortions that I feel like would often come into my mind of like, you're just going to fail anyway, you're just going to drop it. Like, I've actually been consistent with it. And that's thanks to a lot of people, a lot of mental health professionals that helped me out to figure out systems that worked for me, to help me understand how my brain works and how to work with myself, how to be compassionate with myself. And it's also huge thanks to my family. Like, my parents were super
Hmm.
open when I talked to them about it. My husband was super supportive as well. And, my sister, I can't name everybody, but that really helped a lot to be able to just allow myself to be like the final critic of like, where do I want things to go and how do I want things to go? And yeah, so I mean, ask me again in 5 years
In 5 years,
how
yeah,
it's
how
going, but
you?
this momentum is going, and I'm really happy with it.
Awesome. Now I was gonna ask, when did you start your coaching career? How long ago?
Yeah. So, in terms of the coaching itself, I started doing the coaching in about July, but I've been visiting in prisons since about 2020. And then, even
Okay.
before that, I've been doing a lot of kind of a company work with different kinds of groups, and same with NGOs. So, it's
Okay.
kind of like you have similar postures that are really supportive for coaching, especially from the prison visits, because on the one hand, you really need to listen to someone without judgment. At the same time, you have to be yourself. So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that, if someone talks about using drugs, like you say, "Oh, good for you." If that's not how you feel, don't say it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if someone talks about an experience, it's about staying curious with it. Not, "Oh, how dare you," but, "Oh, what led to that? Tell me more. How did you get to that situation?" And that kind of posture is something that can be quite challenging for coaches, for therapists, and whatnot. So
Yeah.
when I kind of made this switch or this transition from prison visitor to coach, I was like, oh, that's what we're doing. Oh, okay, super. So yeah.
Okay. And yeah, because you just mentioned a bit, but the skills that you see now from your first experiences, what are the skills? I'm talking about soft, but also hard skills that are required in order to do this job.
Mm, definitely. So I think a lot of the soft skills people can guess. I mean, working on active listening, being able to hold silence. That's not always easy, but
Hold
learn to hold
silence.
it.
Uh-huh.
It's very good. Also, being able to improvise and anticipate the unknown, and just accept that you're not going to anticipate the unknown. So just be comfortable with that. But a lot of the hard skills as well are going to be, understanding psychoeducation, understanding the biological sides of things, having
Hmm.
some kind of literacy to be able to read scientific journals and get the gist of what it's saying, being able to understand synaptic processes, being able to hold a conversation with a psychiatrist that is going to stay at a clinical level, because it's also about
Right.
making sure you're working together with other allied professionals,
Right.
because there are plenty of things that coaches can't do that therapists and psychiatrists need to be there for support. So it's also about making sure you know what the limits are. You also have to know how to do admin, to do
Okay.
invoicing, to send emails to people, to send reminders. But I think one of my favorite parts is actually the visual side of things. I'm a very visual person, so I like to use different tools to show people, different processes, or using metaphors and putting them, on a template, and being able to show people with pictures. A lot of my fellow coaches are like, "Oh, so you work with children?" And I'm like, "No, these are for adults." I love kids, but I know that there's a a special kind of pain, I think, that comes with having ADHD as an adult, and having to kind of relearn and learn to love yourself. So yeah, in terms of some of those hard skills, it's also about using different kinds of tools that, maybe people wouldn't expect. So yeah, so I
Yeah.
really like being able to use that kind of visual and creative side,
Okay.
to help support people.
So is it always a live session, meaning like in presence of the other person, or do you do a lot of online coaching?
So I do like to do in-person sessions, but I also, since I do a lot of visuals, online is actually great, because then you can share a screen and not just show a picture, but you
Mm.
can also, do an activity where you ask people to type up, "Hey, what was this experience like? Let's focus on the emotions, the behavior, the consequences," and they can write it down in real time. You can see what they're writing and you talk about it together. So visual, being able to do like a visio conference is great for ADHD coaching.
Okay, awesome. And is there something that you have learned that could be useful, for the listeners who are intrigued by your profession?
Yes. So both as a coach, but as a person,
Yes.
I was always taught the phrase, "shoot for the moon and you'll land in the stars." Right? So it's about dream big, go, don't, no limits, don't hold yourself back. When
Mm.
it comes to making goals for yourself or building a routine, this is not the attitude we want to take. We want the goal to be achievable. Not only achievable if I try hard enough, achievable. It's achievable in the sense of, this is maybe not my worst day, but this is not a good day. But I can still do the thing I told myself I would. So
Mm.
I think a lot of people with ADHD, and just people in general, have high expectations for themselves, which they wouldn't put on anyone else. So it's, make your goals achievable, but like
Mm.
really achievable, because the goal is consistency also, not just doing it one day.
One day, yeah. And that's probably the hardest part, eh? To make it consistent
Yes.
for all of us, ADHD and non ADHD.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Carolina, was really insightful. Thank you very much. And I really wish the best because you just started, so you have a whole career in front of you, and I'm sure you're gonna be shining.
Thank you so much, Laura.
And that was Carolina sharing her journey as an ADHD coach and giving us a glimpse into how this meaningful work transforms lives. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check out more on Job Tales. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or on wrsworldradio.ch. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week for another inspiring career story on Job Tales.